Okay.
I'm going to share my screen.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Welcome. Sorry for the delay. Welcome to today's presentation. My name is Christina Cardona, and I'm the CBC co-director. It's my privilege to share this hybrid space in person and virtually with you all today. I would like to begin with the CCBC acknowledgement of the People's Statement. The Community College of Baltimore County wishes to acknowledge the indigenous peoples whose homeland is now Baltimore County. The lands upon which these campuses are built were once inhabited by many peoples, including the Assateague, Choptank, and Susquehannock people. The Community College of Baltimore County not only recognizes and honors the history and legacy of these people, but also the Native communities who have made Baltimore their home, most especially the Lumbee and Cherokee people who made rich contributions to the region. The Community Book Connection is a faculty-led interdisciplinary reading initiative dedicated to promoting culture of discussion and debate in the CCBC community. Each year, students, faculty, and staff vote for a book and a theme that will be used for the following academic year. And this year, it is The Secret Life of Bees. Then we take this book and collaborate to develop curriculum, programming, and events to create community, conversation, and transformative experiences. Today, we welcome Francis Mullan, who is an entomologist, educator, and naturalist. He holds a bachelor's degree in insect ecology and conservation from the University of Delaware and a master's degree in integrative biology from Kennesaw
State
University. Right. Thank you. It's all yours.
Okay. Thank you so much, Dr. Cardona. Thank you for inviting me back. It's a pleasure to be here again. I apologize in advance. I'm on the tail end of a cold, so my voice is slightly hoarse. I'm going to try to speak up, and if I have to take more breaks for water than usual, I apologize, but I think we should be mostly good to go for today. So, yeah, the truth about bees. We all are excited to learn, and let's get into it. And first talk about stink bugs and ladybugs, which don't really have anything to do with bees, to be honest, but bear with me here for a second. See where I'm going with this. How many people like stink bugs? Probably nobody, right? Yeah, I'm not the biggest fan of this one either. Well, what I found in my work as an educator is that most people, when they think of stink bug, they think of the guy you're looking at here, which it turns out is just one particular species. This is the brown marmorated stink bug, which is not from here. It's actually only existed in our country within like the last 30 years. And it is invasive, which you can see the definition there. But basically, it's caused some major problems for our environment. So it's not a good guy. I don't particularly like this one either. However, there are other kinds of stink bugs. In fact, there's actually a lot. Several of our native species would be hard to distinguish, to be totally honest. This bunch of kind of, well, you know, there's the brown marmorated stink bug, and there's a bunch of brown native stink bugs too. But you've also got guys like this. How many of you have seen one of these before? Or this one? Or this one? How about this one that I like to call the goth stink bug, which has these ridiculous shoulder spines? Or this insane thing that's metallic blue with neon orange spots on it. This does exist in our area. You have to take my word for it, but truly it does. And these are all technically stink bugs, just native ones that were supposed to be here. And unfortunately have been a bit displaced by the brown marmorated one that nobody likes. So let's talk about ladybugs for a second.
Sorry, not to interrupt, but we can't, it's not advancing. The slide isn't advancing on the Zoom.
Thank you for the notice on that. Dr. Cardona, do you have any suggestions for maybe resetting the PowerPoint? Sorry for technical difficulties, people. Oh, yeah, maybe click, try to. There you go.
Yeah. It's just my idea. I don't know.
It's working now.
Except now you're muted and we cannot hear you on Zoom.
Try again.
Oh, I think maybe now it's
Just doing this.
yes. Okay. And okay, how are we doing now?
We got it.
Excellent, great, okay. Onward, thank you. All right, sometimes these things take a while, right? Yeah. Okay, anyway, all you guys missed was just all these pretty pictures of stink bugs, which may or may not have something to do with my point. You'll see in a bit. But anyway, ladybugs. Who doesn't love ladybugs? They're beautiful little things, right? How many of you knew that the one that, you know, this guy is actually also a particular species, which is also not from here. This is the so-called Asian lady beetle. Ladybug and lady beetle are two common names, same thing, by the way. This one has also been here only for a few decades, and it is, I would say, like the quintessential ladybug in terms of how it looks. If you see art of ladybugs, it is always this thing that is depicted. But it's not the only one. How many of you have seen this? There's this like meme that gets passed around on social media a lot that looks something like this. In case any of you have seen this, to very quickly dispel, I find this thing very funny for numerous reasons. There's actually a lot to pick apart with this, but the main thing is that it seems to say that the Asian lady beetle is bad and invasive because it's not native, and this other one is native and good. But actually, both of these, which are both the two most common species of ladybugs by far in our entire region, are both not native, and both kind of a problem for the area. I won't get too deep into that, but anyway, point is, there's also other kinds of ladybugs, like the convergent lady beetle. A bunch of these that are our native species also look pretty similar to the non-native ones, but then you've got stuff like the pink spotted lady beetle, which is like really quite literally hot pink. The adorably tiny 20 spotted, the polished lady beetle, which has no spots at all, the twice stabbed lady beetle, the thrice stabbed lady beetle. I think that these guys must be friends with the goth stink bug. Yes. Anyway, who would have thought that lady beetles could go goth? All right, so let's talk about bees. Thank you for bearing with me. Obviously, that non sequitur had nothing to do with the presentation. Honeybees, everybody loves them, right? The most famous bees in the world. Anybody have a guess what I'm about to say next? Would you be surprised if I told you that honeybees are not native and that they are woefully unrepresentative of bee diversity as a whole? Let's talk a little bit more about who we're actually looking at here. This is the European honeybee. Yes, that word European typically gets left off the name of this species, but it was brought here about 500 years ago by the first European colonists, because there are no native honeybees in the Americas at all. Colonists quickly realized that when they came here, and they didn't want to leave all their wax and honey and other great things behind in the old world when they came here. So this bee is now the dominant pollinator for our agricultural system as a whole. So it's quite important for a lot of things. And in recent years, it's become the star of the Save the Bees movement, which has been a thing that's probably happened for the last 20 years or so, while this thing called colony collapse disorder has been wreaking havoc in the honeybee world. I won't get too deep into exactly what the details of that are, but basically, a lot of people freaked out about that for good reason, because there was a lot of colony deaths of honeybees, and a lot of beekeepers were having serious, like catastrophic losses of their hives. But this part doesn't get talked about much, which is that the honeybee is not at risk of extinction, like really at all, actually. And there's a pretty simple reason for this. They are directly managed by our species constantly. And that doesn't mean that, they can't suffer losses among many individual beekeepers, but as a whole, they are essentially livestock, which means that, just like chickens or cows or pigs, as long as our species is there to maintain them and take care of them, honeybees are not really going to have any issues with, staying alive as a whole globally. There's this excellent quote by Scott Black, who is the leader of one of the primary insect conservation societies in the country, which is keeping honeybees to save the bees is like raising chickens to save birds. So I think we could all figure why, that would not be the most fruitful effort. So anyway, the truth about bees, I'm not going to bury the lead here. There's basically 2 points to this. One is that honeybees don't need saving. Let's just, be frank about it. But many other kinds of bees do. We'll get in a sec about who those people are. Also, this, kind of just like stink bugs and ladybugs, bees are an incredibly diverse group of animals, of which the honeybee is not well representative. So let's talk for a second. Can anyone over Zoom confirm that you're still seeing the same normal screen? I just adjusted a setting for.
Now we see the next slide, the projector. We're seeing the presenter view.
Sorry about that. Never mind. So, who are the other kinds of bees? Well, there's a couple that I think would be familiar to most, probably. You've got bumblebees and carpenter bees, which are big, they're yellow and black and fuzzy, seem reasonably bee-like, I think, to most people. But then you got things like this guy. Anybody ever seen one of these before? This is actually a carpenter bee as well, just a different type that is actually like super abundant in our environment. It's just that people don't know about it, so you tend not to see it or notice it. There are similar bees to that one, which are also kind of tiny and like dark metallic, like sweat bees, which, you can see why probably these go under the radar most of the time, right? But then you got things like this. How many of you have ever seen a bright green sweat bee? Okay, a couple of people. Oh yeah, I've taken a couple of you guys on walks with them. So. Well, I find most people I talk to have no idea these things exist, or they assume that they're flies. And admittedly, it's confusing because there are a lot of flies that are also bright green. But no, these actually are bees. They are pretty closely related to the honeybees that we were just talking about. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. There's also mining bees, mason bees, mast bees, leafcutter bees, resin bees, striped sweat bees, deep blue sweat bees, blood bees. Apparently there's like a goth insect in every kind of group of insects. Longhorn bees, cuckoo longhorn bees, nomad cuckoo bees, cellophane cuckoo bees, a lot of different kinds of cuckoo bees. I'll talk more about this later. But this is all just staying local, by the way. All these things exist within our region. If you look global, you start seeing some really interesting out there stuff. How many of you knew that there are blue carpenter bees in the world? Yeah, and probably you're not surprised to hear this is high on my to-do list to go see one of these. They're in Southeast Asia, so which is a fun place to visit anyway. So kill two birds with one stone. So all this is to say that honeybees, which for many people is the only kind of bee most people know about, are a tiny part of a way bigger picture of diversity. And, if we're going to try to save the bees, of course, we need to know who they are, right? Also, let's talk about actually the bees that need saving. To be honest, we don't actually have a lot of data on most species of bees, so we're not quite sure how they're doing. exactly, but we do know that a few groups are in some serious trouble. One primary example of this are bumblebees, who, sad to say, about a quarter of all our species in our continent are threatened with some level of extinction. So if anybody happens to recognize the species that I have presented here, this one's called the rusty-patched bumblebee. It gained some fame in the conservation world recently because it was the first insect ever to be listed under the Federal Endangered Species Act. This bee used to be quite common in our region and basically the entire northeastern United States, but within the last 20 years or so, unfortunately, has almost entirely disappeared from most of that range. So, yeah, sad stuff. So, how do we save the bees that actually need saving? Not to disparage honeybees. Honeybees are very important. You know, it's just that if we're going to actually save the bees, we need to make sure we've got our focus right? Basically, there's three ways we're going to do this, I think, which are pretty simple. One is to replace lost habitat. In much of our development as humans, we've ended up destroying the habitat that these creatures had, and now they don't have it. So we need to put that back. Well, more on that later, by the way. Stop poisoning the environment with pesticides, because, well, it's not hard to see how that would cause some issues, right? And there's a third point that I think doesn't get often talked about as much, which is, this is partly a personal philosophy thing, but I think this is very important, which is that I think we need to get people to like these creatures and actually want to save them, to spur a will to preserve them, right? This plays into my greater goal as an educator, really in everything I do, which is that I want to get people excited about biodiversity. And I have two main reasons for this. One is that I think this probably is obvious, people who love biodiversity are more willing or likely to protect it, right? And biodiversity is what sustains us. I mean, it is, I think, not only the most beautiful thing on our planet, but without it, I think it's very unlikely we would survive, or we would be living in a world that I would not want to be living in, and I'm sure most people also would. So, good to be protecting it, I would say. Also, I think studying biodiversity, actually like deeply appreciating it and having some understanding of the complexity of it, just leads to so much joy in life. It has given me an immense amount of joy over the last several years that I've really been into this. And I want other people to get to know that. I realize that most people don't actually, really. There's a quote I just learned about recently from Teddy Roosevelt that I've really fallen in love with, which is that it is an incalculable added pleasure to anyone's sum of happiness if he or she grows to know, even slightly and imperfectly, I think that's the important part, how to read and enjoy the wonder book. And to expound on that, what I find most exciting just about being somebody who studies the natural world is that that wonder book is endless. I mean, it's ridiculous how many pages are in that. It might technically be finite, because there's probably only a finite number of species that exist in the world to look at, but it's so vast you can never possibly see it all within your lifetime, which means that there's just an endless amount of things to discover and to derive excitement and joy from that. But there's a greater truth here that I want to point at, which is that the truth about the diversity of bees is a truth of most groups of organisms. It very much applies to bees, maybe even more so than some groups, but it definitely applies to ladybugs and stink bugs and flies and wasps and roses and buttercups and all kinds of different groups that you wouldn't think of. There is an amazing amount of diversity in really all groups, but especially the groups that tend to get overlooked by us, that are not really taught about as well in our society. And people's understanding of so many of these things is based on like just one member or two, which are often disliked or hated or feared. So of course that presents a major obstacle to them being able to appreciate that beauty of that biodiversity. But again, personal philosophy here, pardon the soapbox I'm stepping on, that those who know these truths have endless opportunities to experience the thrill of discovery, which I think you can't understate how wonderful of a joy that is to experience. And I want everybody to get to know that. So anyway, just laying this all out here. My goals for the presentation, a little bit of a roadmap going forward. I want to spark fascination for bee diversity, because again, I think people who are excited and fall in love with this diversity are more willing to protect it, which is ultimately something we're going to need to do for ourselves, I think, to survive in the ecological crisis that we're all in. I want to alleviate fear of bees, because I'm aware many people are terrified of these things, which is a common fear to have. It's understandable, but I think it's largely based in misunderstanding. And I think it can be cleared up fairly easily, actually. So I plan to do my best to alleviate that and eliminate it. We'll talk about how you can actually save them, at least some basics on that. That really would require a whole presentation on its own. And of course, I wish to inspire a greater curiosity for all the life that surrounds us. Again, bees are really just the tip of the iceberg. But there is plenty to dive into just there, so that'll be our focus for today. Okay, so part one, really getting into it. I figured it's probably important to clarify this first, of why we actually need to save the bees, right? Which I think most people, we basically do this, right? It's because of bees being pollinators. But I thought maybe for a sec we just could clarify what this is really about, right? So as I'm sure most people know, pollination, but basically is when bees, or any kind of animal, moves pollen from one flower to another, which then causes the plant to reproduce. And plants are the foundation for essentially every ecosystem on Earth. So obviously that's pretty important, right? Now, what's funny about this, by the way, is that bees are not doing this out of the goodness of their hearts. This is kind of a happy accident with evolution that this happens. I'll explain more in a sec on why bees do this, but they do, and they're really good at it. So we really need them to do that job. From a human perspective, why we care about this is, of course, because the end product of pollination is all this wonderful stuff. Every fruit you've ever eaten was a pollinated flower at some point. But ecologically, again, why this is so critical is because of what the fruits contain, which is all this stuff, which, a plant doesn't need to be pollinated for it individually to survive, but the species, many members of it, will need to be pollinated to pass on the next generation. So this is a very critical process that happens in our environment. Now, bees are not the only things that do this. I'm sure most people have heard about this, but to put a more fine point on it, the big, five, I would say, of pollinators, which are all insects, are bees, wasps, beetles, flies, and butterflies, or moths, which are really the same thing, but that's a whole other topic to get into, which I don't have time to do. So anyway, altogether, they pollinate somewhere around 80% of all the flowering plants in the world, which, by the way, is somewhere around 300,000 species. When we talk about admiring biodiversity, plants are a ridiculously huge thing to dive into, which I've recently become a nerd about, but again, that requires its whole other full presentation, so we're not going to do that today. Anyway, again, from the human angle, they also aid to some degree in pollination of around 75% of all the different kinds of crops that we grow. The ones that are particularly dependent on that is a very long list, but here's some of the highlights. Lots of people's favorite fruits, also nuts, good sources of protein and healthy fats, and maybe some things that you wouldn't expect, like actually chocolate and vanilla are incredibly dependent on pollinators. So if pollinators were to suddenly go away, all these things would either be much harder to come by and way more expensive, or perhaps just gone because the amount of manpower you'd need to feasibly hand pollinate these as humans would just be too difficult for really anybody to get the whole. Anyway, it would be a mess. So I think we should try to not have the pollinators die off. That's not even to say what would happen ecologically if that were to happen. So, okay, now that we've established that, what are bees exactly, right? I work as an educator. I've encountered a few colloquial definitions that I think a lot of people hold this. There's a simple one a lot of people hold, which is that bees are yellow stripy things that sting, right? So you don't want to mess with them. And there is not really any differentiation between bees or wasps in this case. Some people try to make a distinction of bees and wasps. I hear this one a lot too, that they can all sting, but bees are pretty chill, won't really bother you. Wasps are mean and will sting you just for fun. There's a lot to pick apart there. But we can make this more accurate if we just cross out a few things. Bees are wasps, really, actually. Allow me to elaborate. So, more accurately, this is the best technical definition I know of. Bees are a group of wasps. They're vegetarians compared to the rest of wasps that eat plant pollen as a form of protein to complete their development. So you may have gathered if bees are vegetarian, then that implies the vast majority of wasps are carnivorous, which is why wasps are so important to the environment, because essentially wasps keep all the other kinds of insects in check and maintain the ecological balance of things. But yeah, I had to do a lot of defense of wasps in my career, if you can believe that. But anyway, bees originate, this graphic here, which is hard to read, and that's kind of the point, because the wasp family tree is absolutely ginormous. There's something like this over 100,000 described species of wasps globally, and estimates say that there could be anywhere from like 1 million to maybe even a few million species of wasps total that we have yet to find. So anyway, huge group. But bees come within this clade, which is related to things like ants and yellow jackets, hornets, those sorts of things. They sit at the bottom here. They evolved somewhere around 125 million years ago with the advent of flowering plants. And essentially the bees' ancestors figured out that instead of having to hunt other insects all day to get their protein needs, they could just pick up plant pollen. So they started doing that. And turned out that was such a successful decision that there are now over 20,000 species of bees that exist in the world. Our country alone has about a fifth of that, by the way. We have around 4,000 in the United States. We have over 400 just in Maryland, which is, I think, a plenty big number to wrap one's head around. So just the diversity in Maryland is pretty astonishing. So I get people asking me this a lot. How do you actually tell bees from wasps? Because from some of the stuff I've shown you, you've seen now that bees do not always fit the mold of hairy, yellow, black, fuzzy that we think they do. So, is there a way to easily distinguish them from wasps consistently? Not really, fortunately. Nothing foolproof. There are some tips and tricks, which I will show you. But the diversity of both groups, bees and wasps, is so enormous that there's a lot of overlap. It can be difficult. But I thought this might be fun to play a little game here to test this notion and see how well you guys can pick up on patterns and differences. So don't worry, we won't be here for too long, but I hope this will be fun. So let's see, and maybe there might be a way to try to do this on Zoom, but maybe I'll just give people a sec to think about it before we reveal the answers. So do you guys think the left one is a bee or the right one is a bee? People in the room can raise their hands if you want. If you raise your hand if you think the left one is a bee. Raise your hand if you think the right one's a bee. Yeah, it seems to be unanimous. For those on Zoom, well, I'm gonna guess you all mostly went the same way. That's right. I figured that one's kind of a freebie. I wanted to start you off easy. So the left is a European hornet, which is a type of social wasp. The right is a carpenter bee, which is native to our area. This is one tip for how you can often distinguish bees and wasps, and this is a little hard to see because it's a small feature, but some kinds of wasps have this notch within their eye. I don't know if you can just make that out on the eye of that thing, but it's not a whole oval. There's like a little dip cut out of it. Bees, at least in our region, never have eyes like that. Some wasps do. So if you see that shape, it's a wasp. You can be sure. All right, here's another one. Raise your hand if you think the left one's a bee. Raise your hand if you think the right one's a bee. Also pretty, okay, I forget this one's also fairly easy, so correct. And here, this is not the best image to show that. The notch in the eye is still there on that paper wasp. There's another feature here, which is another good indicator, which is that the wasp's wings are folded. That is a feature of the group, or the family rather, that wasp belongs to. Again, not all wasps have that feature, but no bees have it. So if you see that wing folding thing going on,
What do
it
you
means
mean
that it's
by
a
wings
wasp.
folding?
Yeah, so this is, and I apologize if the photo of the bee doesn't show better this distinction, but the bee's wings are more of a, I don't know how you would describe the shape, but they're fanned out more, kind of like this. They lay flat across the bee's back, but if you could see the wings, the bee's wings from top down, it's more of a like paddle kind of shape, I guess. These kinds of wasps, like paper wasps or hornets, their wings are almost parallel-sided. When they fly, they unflap them and it becomes a paddle, but at rest, it's like very distinctively this two
So
parallel-sided.
the wing like folds in on itself.
Exactly, yeah. And they look, kind of like aerodynamic in that way, I guess. They kind of create this like hard V shape of the wings when they're at rest. So if you see that, that's also a giveaway. It's a wasp. All right. Another one here. What do you think? Is the left a wasp or is the right one a wasp? Left one's a wasp, right one's a bee. I'm gonna get most of you probably got that one too. So, all right, we're ready for something harder. Do you think that the left one is a bee or the right one's a bee? Look at the wings very carefully. Okay, raise your hand if you think the left one's a bee. Raise your hand if you think the right one's a bee. Or if you're not sure, it's okay. The left one is a cuckoo bee, which happens to be a mimic of the species on the right, which is the southern yellow jacket. So again, I apologize that the wings, it's not easiest to see the distinction between these two photos, but the yellow jacket has that folded wing thing going on. The bee does not, although the bee obviously tries not to make that too obvious to see that. How about these two? Raise your hand if you think the left one's a bee. Raise your hand if you think the right one's a bee. Okay, gotcha. That's a trick. They're both bees. Yes, yeah.
Is it the same thing or are these?
No, these are two species of other kinds of cuckoo bees. The left one's called a sharp-tailed cuckoo bee. The right one is a longhorn cuckoo bee. I think the right one looks a little bit more bee-like, which I saw you all mostly went that direction. But yeah, some bees can look pretty, kind of sharp and angry like wasps do. A few of them anyway. All right, just one more. Do you think the left one's a bee, or do you think the right one's a bee? Raise your hand if you think the left one's a bee. Raise your hand if you think the right one's a bee. Raise your hand if you think that neither is a bee. Those people have the right idea. All right, up to this point, everything I showed you is native to our area. I cheated a little bit in that the one on the left is a species of velvet ant, which is a type of wingless wasp that is native to Chile. So you will not see this here, sadly, because I know it's absolutely adorable. But someday we'll go to Chile and see it for myself. The right one is something called a Bayes wasp, which is a extremely tiny parasite of insect eggs. And they are like just super compacted and rounded so they can fit into the eggs of other things. So also adorable, isn't it? Oh, one more bonus round. All right, raise your hand if you think the left one's a bee. Right, raise your hand if you think the right one's a bee. Raise your hand if you think that neither are bees. And the front here's got the right idea, but it's probably not what you think. These are both flies. Yes, yeah. Flies are their own like absurdly diverse group of animals that get a bad rep because they are represented typically by, I don't know, a few famous, either the things that eat fruit in your kitchen or the shiny stuff that eats poop on the sidewalk that nobody likes, right? There's tens of thousands of species which are look a bajillion different ways, and there are many that are like very precise mimics of bees and wasps, so that nothing messes with them, which is a pretty good life strategy, apparently. So anyway, those are a couple really cool species that also are native to our area. Okay, so I imagine sometimes when people ask me about how to tell apart bees and wasps, I think it's rooted in an idea of that wasps are more dangerous, so people want to be able to, for like harm reduction's sake, figure out if I need to be scared of this one but not be scared of that one, right? So I wanted to address this. Are bees dangerous? Like, should I be scared of them? Basically, the answer is no. Actually, really, in almost all cases, you don't. Actually, that goes for wasps too, by the way. In almost all cases, you guys are gonna have to take my word for this, but I will explain. Bees and wasps are non-aggressive for all species. The only case, social bees and wasps, which are the minority of species, can be aggressive if and only if you are very close to their nest and they perceive you as a threat to their young, which they are collectively caring for hundreds of little baby bees or wasps, so they have a lot to lose, so they're very defensive moms, essentially. If you don't believe me when, oh, sorry. By the way, half of all bees and wasps literally can't sting because male bees and wasps have no stingers. I could go more into later on the Q&A if you all are curious why that is exactly, but yeah, males can't do anything to you in almost all cases. So anyway, if you don't believe me that wasps truly are non-aggressive away from their nests, I offer this video as some proof. These are some scoliid wasps that I found this past fall, which are a beautiful native species. They're foraging on this wingstem flower, and they totally didn't mind that I was there. One got confused and realized that I wasn't something that she could get a snack from, so she flew away. But the other one, for some reason, was very curious and hung out on my hand for a while. And again, you have to take my word for it, I did not get stung. They don't care as long as you are not actively posing a threat to either their personal safety or the safety of their young. So really, the only thing that you need to be wary of when it comes to bees and wasps in terms of not wanting to get stung by them is the social ones. So I think really the best strategy here is just to know what the social nest types are, so that you can recognize those and know to give them a respectful distance so that you don't trip the wire that they have set out. So there's 4 types basically, which are shared partly across bees and wasps. So you've got ground nesters, which are like typified by yellow jackets. I know many people have a fortunate story of accidentally stepping on one of these as a kid and then just getting the bejesus stung out of them. You've also got cavity nesting bees or wasps. So like often if there's like a hole inside of a tree, they'll use that. It's above ground, unlike the ground nesters, but similar concept. And then there are types of hanging paper nests that certain species of wasps make. Our native bald-faced hornets or other related yellow jackets will make these like paper mache enclosed hanging nests, and paper wasps, which is a confusing common name, by the way, will make what are called like these umbrella nests. That's what the top right one looks like. So anyway, as long as you keep several feet away from these, the wasps will either not know you're there and so not care about you, or recognize that you're not trying to potentially hurt their young, so they will leave you alone. By the way, the reason that wasps are so aggressive is because they've had to contend with mammals like bears that will raid their hives to eat all their young, because it turns out that insect larvae are an awesome source of protein. And if you are a bear with huge claws and really thick fur, stings from bees or wasps don't really mean anything to you. So you can just go in there and have at it and have a great snack, and the wasps will desperately try to fight back, but it's a hard battle to win. So over time, the wasps have had to become more aggressive to have a chance at all of fighting back to save all of their young. So it's unfortunate now, in an area like ours where we don't have bears that are patrolling Baltimore, but the wasps, they've had this now hardwired into them from evolution, so they don't understand that we're not a threat. So if they see a giant mammal close to their hive, they freak out, understandably, and will, try to attack you unless you make it clear you're not trying to hurt them. Also, by the way, people have told me so many anecdotes, which I'm sure many are true, about this one time a wasp ran into me and stung me, and I know I was nowhere near a nest, so clearly they're just evil and do this because they hate you, right? So that probably does. It does occasionally happen. Mistakes happen. I would like to present a reason for that. If you can imagine for a second, put yourself in the shoes of a wasp or bee. Imagine if you have a knife that is a part of your body that at any moment you could eject to defend yourself with, without even thinking about it, like a bee or wasp does. Now imagine you're running along and you either out of nowhere hit some kind of giant obstacle or get ensnared in something, and you don't even have time to react, really. How likely do you think it is that you would, shoot the knife out because you're freaked out? Probably that would happen a lot of the time, right? So it's lucky that usually bees and wasps are very good flyers and they're really good at evading obstacles, but on the occasion that they mess up and they run into something and they get freaked out, I don't think one can really blame them too much that they might freak out and pull the knife out. So it's unfortunate that happens, but if they are conscious of what's happening to them, again, they are not aggressive as long as you're not a threat to their young. So, by the way, for all the other kinds of bees and wasps, again, there's a minority of species that are social, meaning that they all live together, cooperatively care for their young. There's a queen-worker dynamic, that whole thing. Most species are solitary, which means that it's every female for herself. She digs her own little nest in the ground, which often looks just like this. They're typically pretty inconspicuous. And if you could have X-ray vision and look into this, you'd see it looks something like this. So one female working all by herself, because she's her own bee or wasp woman, will dig this little tunnel network, lay a bunch of eggs in the end tunnels, give them all food. If it's a bee, she'll give them pollen. If it's a wasp mom, for most species, she'll give them some kind of prey insect that's paralyzed. It makes her, kind of like a meat freezer, I guess, or something, for an insect version of that. And then the egg will eventually hatch and the larvae will munch on what mom provided. And a year goes by, it rides out the winter, and it pops out of the ground as a new bee or wasp and repeats the whole cycle. These things are always non-aggressive. If you're a single bee or wasp and all your larvae are totally dependent on you, you really do not want to pick a fight with things that are way bigger than you, because the chance that you die is very high, and that means that all your young are screwed over. If you're a social bee or wasp, you have tens of thousands of sisters who could go on carrying the work of caring for all the young for you if you were to die. So actually, it kind of is worth it to valiantly fight for the safety of the hive and possibly risk death in the process. So, but that's why the solitary bees and wasps, even if you step on their nest, the chances of them stinging you are extremely low, unless you happen to freak them out, which is understandable. So for the bees who don't nest in the ground, it's a few other things that they do. Again, it's about 70% of bees and wasps generally that nest in this fashion. The other 30% about nest above ground in some capacity. There's a bunch of different things that they do. They'll either nest within dead wood, which is like our carpenter bees infamously do. A lot of species will nest within the stems of dead plants. That top right photo is super magnified. They can take advantage of really tiny stems. It's amazing what they can do with that. And still yet some things will use probably naturally, again, tree holes or in the modern world, they might even use like bird boxes that birds are not currently nesting in. There's some species of bumblebees that will do that. Okay, so now that we realize that bees are not out to hurt us and they're important, so we should probably preserve them. How can we support them? Because we know now that beekeeping is not the way to do this. So what's the proper way? Well, to go back to this slide, again, 3 points that I think are really what makes this, but the latter two I think are pretty self-explanatory. So let's focus on the first one, because this one, there's a lot to talk about this. I'll give you a very quick crash course on this, because again, this could be its own whole 2-hour presentation. So, but the basics, 3 beautiful words: plant native plants. Native plants are the foundation for the ecosystem. All of our wildlife have evolved with these plants, and the inner relationships of them all run incredibly deep. So when we plant non-natives and fill the environment with those, it disrupts all those evolved relationships and can cause chaos. So if you replace the native plants that all these things, bees, ladybugs, all the mammals, everything evolved with and have known to rely on, then suddenly the balance starts coming back and the environment becomes much healthier. Plus, they're really pretty. I mean, like, why wouldn't you want to plant this stuff, right? So, a few things, because unfortunately, the native plant, like, horticultural industry is a quickly growing thing, which is awesome, but it's still sort of in its infancy. But there's some great resources to figure out where you can get this stuff, in case any of you people are gardeners or would like to tell other people about this. It's an awesome website from the Maryland Native Plant Society that shows you a interactive map of, I think it's consistently updated, of all the nurseries in the whole region that sell this stuff, because you often have to go to a specific nursery to actually find native plants. Stuff like Home Depot typically doesn't sell much of it. And as for what to plant, because we have over 2,000 species of plants that are native to Maryland, so that's, could lead to some choice paralysis if you don't really know what to go for exactly. People have done the hard work for us and told you exactly what you should focus on. So the National Wildlife Federation has this awesome list, what they call the Keystone Plants list. Keystone species, plants, animals, whatever, are ones that essentially have an inordinate impact and importance to their environment. So these are plants that, based on the number of insects they feed, that the insects depend on, which are then, the key part of the food web for the environment. These plants are obviously especially important compared to all other types. For bees specifically, there's these ones. The big 3 that are represented here would be your sunflowers, asters, and goldenrods, which is stuff that you might commonly see in a meadow, but in case you're not into foraging, and also there's like some ethical issues with that. There's plenty of good nurseries that you can find this stuff in from in abundance. There's lots of different specific species to choose from, which have fun different traits and all different sort of morphologies. They're really beautiful, and they support the bees. So why wouldn't you want to do that, right? Another list to point you to, just because this one has a lot of fun ideas. Again, if you're a gardener and are looking for ideas for a palette you want to fill out color-wise and stuff, or more details on exactly how your plants are supporting the environment around you, the Xerxes Society has their own list. This, I think, complements the National Wildlife Federation one really well. But here's a bunch of other just awesome, really beautiful species that might not necessarily be like supporting the most bees possible, but they support many other things. Really, like, any native flower is going to support bees well. There's just, those few really big ones that support a ton for whatever. That's just how evolution works out. So if you had a limited budget, I would focus on planting these ones. But if you have more time or money, lots of really awesome choices to make. So. And as I talked about earlier, when we're talking about the vast majority of bees are solitary, so they need shelter too. They need food and shelter to survive. Bee shelter is either ground, that's usually bare, or at least just some amount of space to dig into, or plant stems. So how many of you have heard of bee hotels or bee houses? There's a bunch of different words for it. Yeah. So this is a fun, I think relatively recent concept that a lot of people have been working with and spreading the word about for a way to support stem nesting bees. And they make for like a really fun garden aesthetic statement too. The thing to really know about them, which I think this point has not been said as much maybe, is that you absolutely have to clean them or else they can actually be a detriment to the local bee community. So my suggestion, if you're going to go this route, is just get or make a simple one like the one you see in the top left that is just simply a collection of like stems tied together. And then essentially, you'll see if bees have nested in them at the end of the season, they'll block the end of the stem off with mud or leaves, something. The next season, if the bees emerge, the stem will be open again. You can take photos before and after to check and compare if you want. Once the bees leave in spring, just throw the whole stem out and then replace it. And that way you assure that it's a fresh new stem and it's clean. The issue, if you don't do this, then the stems can harbor pathogens and parasites over time. And if the bees in the area are really desperate to, there are like no good native stems around, so they have to pick that, then they'll keep nesting in there, and that can spread parasites and pathogens to the bee community, which would not be good. So, yeah. Honestly, again, bee hotels can be a really fun thing if you manage them correctly. They're fine. I think the better method, honestly, again, is just plant native plants, and you can manage them a little bit so that they do this, and you kill two birds with one stone. If you want to look this up later, if you Google Xerxes save the stems, you'll find this graphic. You can study it as much as you want. But essentially, there's a pretty easy way to, if you plant certain native plants that have sturdy stems that bees would love to nest in, all you've got to do is trim them over time. Like let's say you plant a purple cone flower, which is a beautiful native that has sturdy stems. In its first season, it grows, flowers. Once it dies for the season and it's just the cone heads, you can cut them. They suggest to varying heights. I guess that attracts different kinds of bees maybe. Bees will nest in there and then just leave them. The next season, the plant will shoot up new flowering stalks, which will hide the dead ones that are still standing from last year. And then at the end of that season, you've got a few month-old stems and 1-year-old shorter decaying stems. The bees from last year will emerge from the really old stems, and then soon enough, those really old stems will just fall over and die, or if you want, you can trim more, But then the newer old dead stems, you just do the same thing again, you trim at the right time, and then you have this like permanently recycling stems that are automatically clean, and it also doubles as, obviously they get food out of the flowers when they're flowers and alive. So this is how nature intended, right? We're just managing it correct. So okay, the last section I wanted to hit on, if you are inspired to either look at bees more around you or want to plant native plants to try to draw more native bees to your yard, because hopefully I've inspired you that native bees are awesome. You should want to see these beautiful things around us. Which ones are you most likely to meet? Because again, there's over 400 species in Maryland, which is a lot to keep track of, but there are like a few major players. So I thought I'd introduce you guys to just a few to give you some sense of who you might recognize, just for fun. So again, starting off with the ones that I think most people know, bumblebees, of course, which I've learned now in my talks and stuff I've given that a lot of people don't understand that bumblebees are different from honeybees, but they are distinct. They're relatively closely related. I guess you can consider them like cousins, but bumblebees are similar to honeybees in some ways and really different in others. They're one of the only, they're really the only bee native to North America that is what we call obligately social. So what makes honeybees interesting, there's a lot of things to talk about this, but they always exist as a social species. Bumblebees are the same. There's other kinds of bees that, again, most are how I define solitary. It's every bee female for herself. There is no queen or no workers, no hive, none of that. There's other species where, to depending on the environmental circumstances, a bee might choose to be social and make a few daughters, and then they kind of like help around the house, so to speak. But there's other times where the same species will not do that and just go it alone. So anyway, if you see bumblebees, it's either a queen who has yet to start a nest, but will soon be joined by many worker daughters that are going to help her out, or you're seeing a worker or a drone that has a nest somewhere it belongs to with many brothers and sisters. So these guys are kind of the typical, black and yellow, fuzzy, lovely things. They typically nest underground, and their nests are notoriously difficult to find, but if you do find one, you can consider yourself lucky. Again, I would give it a wide berth, but you can admire them, I don't know, coming out the hole and being industrious, which is kind of cool. They are arguably some of our most powerful and important pollinators because they're just really industrious because of all that hair. They just catch a ton of pollen and are really effective at moving that around for many different species in our environment. So also, one of my favorite things about this group, if one were to get into bee watching, like one might get into bird watching, I think bumblebees are an awesome starting point because they have relatively low diversity. Still, this is a chart of the different species in our area, which probably seems like a lot, but this is actually nothing compared to many other groups of bees that exist. But as you can see, there is distinct differences in all the color patterns of these things. So you can learn those color patterns and actually quite readily recognize the different ones you see in our environment. In like Baltimore and most of Maryland in general, there's really only like 6, really like 3 species that you really see all the time, which again, when you learn the trick to identify them, it's pretty easy. So anyway, if this is something you're interested in, obviously encourage you to do that. It's a pretty easy skill to pick up. So again, just for fun. Carpenter bees, which again, I think most people are aware of. Although I do wonder how many people don't realize that carpenter bees are true bees. I think, again, bee as like a colloquial word, I think sometimes people don't understand that there's an interrelatedness between all kinds of bees. Carpenter bees are true bees related to bumblebees and honeybees and all the rest. So they are solitary or communal. Again, infamously, they make these nests in wood, which they evolved just to take advantage of like dead logs in a forest or something. And now us humans have provided them with an absolute bounty of that in our fences and porches and everything. So, you can't really blame them for taking advantage of it, especially when we've destroyed so much of the forests around us and naturally occurring dead logs are maybe harder to find. But they are really good pollinators. So like we do need them. I understand why people get really frustrated with them, but they're an important species to have around. Also, there is only the one in our area. For almost all groups of bees, there are, again, many different species. In our region, there's just a single one. So if you ever see this one, looks like this, it is the carpenter bee of the mid-Atlantic United States, Xylocopa virginica. Also, carpenter bees, I think, are great to point out how you can tell the difference between male and female bees in many cases. So you can see here the difference is pretty obvious, right? The male has this really bright face patch, whereas the female space is totally black. This is, by the way, so if you see that and you can recognize it's a male, again, solitary bees are never aggressive, but carpenter bee males tend to be pretty territorial. How many of you have ever had a carpenter bee buzzing in your face and it seems like they're trying to kill you? They can't sting because they're male, so they are all buzz and no bite, so to speak. So yeah, you just ignore them. They're just trying to defend their own little tiny kingdom, so to speak. But anyway, this thing of how you can tell them apart applies actually to a lot of bees, in a trend that I like to call males wear makeup, which is a trend seen across much of the bee and wasp world. Not always, big disclaimer, but in many cases, you all can see how the faces of all these males are painted white, or they might be painted yellow, depending on the species, with different kinds of war paint patterns going on. But yeah, as with many species in nature, it's the males who try to look extra pretty for the females, I suppose. So. Also, I get asked this all the time, how you tell apart bumblebees and carpenter bees. So, any of you know well, I know a couple of you. Anybody who hasn't seen me present before, do you know how to tell them apart? There's a helpful adage for this. So, all right, here's my spin on it. Carpenter bees have a shiny hiney. Bumblebees have a hairy hiney. So if you see carpenter bee's abdomen, its butt, reflecting a lot of light because they don't really have any hair on their abdomen, then that tells you it's a carpenter bee. Because bumblebees, in all cases, at least for our local species, always have a completely hair-filled and like matte abdomen. It doesn't reflect any light at all. So, sure.
Both species sting. You said only females sting.
Correct. I'm sorry, can you?
And both of those, the carpenter and the bumblebee.
Both have the capacity to sting, but both are non-aggressive. Again, as I explained before, in almost all cases. The carpenter bees, I think, since they're solitary, or at most like kind of share like an apartment complex of sorts with other carpenter bees, they are always non-aggressive, even if you are right near their nest. Bumblebees could potentially be aggressive if you were right at their nest, but again, bumblebee nests are, for whatever reason, like extremely rare to find. They're just really good at hiding them, it seems. So the chance of you ever wandering across that is very low. Interestingly, by the way, at least I think this is interesting. This is only a issue being able to tell them apart in our part of the world, really, or at least our part of the country, because it's only here where we have this convergent evolution of the native carpenter bee and a bunch of our bumblebees, that they have this definite color pattern of the like half yellow, half black thing. In the Western United States and many other parts of the world where there are many other species of bumblebees and carpenter bees, they often look totally different. So you would probably never mix them up. But here, same color pattern, but there's that distinction. So now you know, isn't that fun? Also, as I mentioned earlier, there's another type of carpenter bee, which are the small carpenter bees. Doing fine on time, I think, yeah. So these guys, much smaller than their large cousins. You can see in the top left photo there the size difference. The carpenter bee in that photo is not is a West Coast carpenter bee, but it's the same size, so you can imagine the size disparity there. So these bees, although they are much tinier, they live essentially the same kind of life as their larger cousins. Really, the only difference is that because they are so tiny, they have a different niche that they exploit for where they nest, which is that they use single plant stems to nest in instead of giant blocks. So, you might, if you are observing a native garden with cut stems that you cut yourself or happen to be that way, you might see a small carpenter bee digging in there. She'll dig out the pith if she has to, and she'll make a little like tube nest out of that, and then she'll lay a whole bunch of eggs and section them all off so they all get their nice little like cribs to themselves. And those will be her young that'll sleep in there right out the winter, and next year pop out of the hole as new small carpenter bees, and they repeat that. They've been doing that for 100 million years, so I guess it works pretty well for them. Anyway, as you can see, they're kind of pretty, right? They're this like deep metallic color typically. They're very tiny, so it can be hard to notice that and pick up on it in the environment. But if you look close, we have a magnifying glass of some sort. You might just see that if you catch one, for instance, when she's not working her butt off. Another big group, sweat bees. I think now we're venturing into territory where a lot of people don't know about any of these kinds. So, although sweat bees are still known by a bunch of people, I find. But anyway, for those who don't know about sweat bees, I'm sure most people aren't aware of their diversity, at least. They're one of the most diverse families of bees in the country. We have, I think, over 100 species just in Maryland, or close to that. They're an interesting group. They kind of run the gamut of all things bee in a lot of ways. Many are just solitary, single bee all for herself. Some have this communal lifestyle where like one bee will start a nest tunnel and a bunch will use that, but inside it's like an apartment complex. Nobody talks to their neighbors. They just keep things to themselves. And even past that, some are primitively social. This thing I mentioned earlier, where like one bee will make some daughters and then kind of conscript them into helping her out, and they'll become like a very tiny little social unit working together. But that's about the extent of it. They will nest underground or in wood above ground typically. They are big time what we call pollen generalists, meaning that they visit and pollinate a huge variety of plants, so they're very important pollinators for lots of different things. Many are extraordinarily tiny, actually even tinier than the small carpenter bees. It's hard to find a good photo to illustrate this, because they're so tiny you might not be able to see it. But the top right one is like super magnified. I mean, you can see the texture in that person's finger, so you can kind of get a sense of I find most people just assume are gnats until I tell them it's actually a bee, and they're like, what? So. And most fun thing of all, many are these like absolutely gorgeous, bright metallic green colors. Who doesn't like that? There's actually also a bunch that we would call green sweat bees that can veer into this like golden or ruby red territory, which I think is just gorgeous. It's really fun to see these working around a meadow. And also, I'm sure many of you have been wondering this in your head, who's the star of my title slide here. This is also a sweat bee. This is, I think, one of, if not, I don't know, like the most distinctive bee actually in the whole eastern United States. This is the bicolored striped sweat bee. It's a mouthful, I know, but this is the only bee actually in the whole country, as far as I know, that has this green front half, black, white striped back half look. Very distinctive. If you ever see a bee that looks like this, it is that one. It is the only one that looks like that. Well, I think you would agree they're pretty cool looking. So it's a fun one to see around. And again, they're solitary, like almost all bees, not aggressive. If you see this, you don't need to run away screaming from it. I would encourage you to stop and admire it for a second, because it is totally safe to do so. Also, again, I'm sure many people who already knew about sweat bees know why they're called sweat bees, but just to clarify, sorry, the video got distorted a little bit. That's okay. They drink sweat, which is odd, I know. They essentially they need a lot of sodium for some reason, like more so than other kinds of bees. Humans just happen to be walking sodium fountains in hotter parts of the year. And we don't have any hair to get in the way of getting to that, really. So they are drawn to us like a magnet. They do not mean any harm. If you see a sweat bee doing this to you, my advice would be just let her do her thing for a few seconds and let her fly away. They will not sting you. They have gained some notoriety maybe among like farm working hand types, because there's certain places where the sweat bee population is huge, and if you're like really working up a sweat, you can get a ton on you. If you get one in a part of your body where you clamp down on it, then they might freak out and sting you, because you can understand why they would do that, but obviously that's annoying for the person involved. So yeah, but they do not mean any harm. They are not aggressive insects. All right, another big group, leafcutter bees. These guys tend to be pretty monotypic in terms of their coloring. They often have this like gray, white striped, black look. Though there is a really cool one in our area that is this jet black color. It's one of the only bees that looks like that. So, but these ladies, because it's I didn't actually mention this, males can't sting. They also are not involved at all in making nests. It's female bees that do all the work. So I don't know, some feminism angle maybe on this, but yeah, we should admire the females very much for what they do. The males, really all they do is mate and defend territory fiercely, and then promptly die after like a few weeks of being an adult bee flying around madly doing that.
Didn't you mention the males can't sting? Or
Oh yes, right. So they defending territory for a male looks essentially like running into and tackling other bees, and they will like beat the crap out of each other doing that. At the end of like the male bee season, you'll see the males have tattered wings and are all like shook up from just the constant, but yeah, they can't like outright kill each other with a stinger because they don't have one. So anyway, the reason leafcutter bees are called leafcutters is because they cut leaves. They have this amazing thing where they actually like cut these leaves into perfect little semicircles and then construct these awesome bee nerd people called these leaf burritos. You can see they make these stacks of these carefully stitched together leaf cuttings, and there's like multiple. They're called cells. These particular divisions of these constructed leaves. That inside each one is a little bee egg and a bunch of pollen that mom provided, and the bee will hopefully sleep soundly inside of that and grow up to be a new leaf cutter someday. So. Another distinct trait, which I think is kind of cute, is that they carry pollen not on their legs like most bees do, but actually on their abdomen. So if you see a leafcutter bee female, who again, it's only females that collect pollen and do all the work of young rearing. After a full day of work, she'll have this just giant pollen butt, basically, that she's lagging around. So just kind of funny looking. Also, I think this is cool and cute that some male carpenter bees, male leafcutter bees have what are essentially these like gigantic mittens as front legs. That seem like they might be kind of inconvenient to all around, but it has to do with sexual selection. It's a mating thing why they have that, but they're pretty funny to look at. So. Okay, just a few more quick groups before we go through. Mining bees, which if we have time in the Q&A, I can tell you why I actually really hate this common name, but it's the common name that exists. And if you look up more about bees, you'll see this everywhere. So anyway, I'm calling it that. But mining bees are tend to be pretty drab, to be honest, and like not as visually interesting as some other ones, but they're very abundant, especially like in early spring. And there's a lot that are specialist pollinators for many of our native plants. So they're very important for a lot of our beautiful native diversity in the plant world. There's a really lovely one called the Spring Beauty Miner, which is the bottom left bee here that is a specialist on Virginia Spring Beauty, which is like one of our, I think, most beautiful little spring ephemeral wildflowers. So the bee nor the flower could live without each other. They are like totally locked by evolution into that dance together. So. Also, my absolute favorite thing about mining bees is that the males have these fabulous mustaches. Typically, see this one. I feel like he looks like he just has like a broom head that's got taped to his face. So I think that's quite cute, personally. All right, longhorn bees. I'll be honest, you're maybe not as likely to see these ones. If you plant sunflowers or certain other things they really like, you probably eventually would draw them in. But these guys are super fast bees. You have to get lucky to see one just stop for a second so you can get a look at it. But longhorn bees are called that because the males have these absurdly oversized antennae, which are pretty fun. And the females don't have the antenna, but they do have these enormous hind legs that many bee people affectionately call pollen pants. So that's fun. Some are specialists on some really notable plants. If you grow squash or intend to grow squash in the future, you might see a species called the squash bee, which is these guys here in the bottom left, which are specialists on squash. The males sleep inside the flower after it closes for the day and have a little slumber party in there, which is obviously adorable. So great species. But oh, actually, I wanted to show first. Oh, never mind. Sorry. Another group or another thing I really love about these guys, which again, you have to get lucky they stop for a second so you can see this, but they tend to have these really pretty like gemstone eyes. And the females might have kind of deep like blue or purple ones. The males tend to have even brighter ones like this one does that are, I don't know, because you could call that jade or topaz, but anyway, yeah. And just look at the antenna crack me up. Curly cues they make. So. Okay, getting to the last bits here. Cuckoo bees. I mentioned this earlier. What the heck are these guys? They are, well, it would seem like they're a very odd group, except actually they make up a surprising amount of total bee diversity. Turns out basically bees, the whole 20,000 species of them globally have become so successful at gathering so much pollen and such an excess of protein that there's like a fifth or a sixth of all bees that are just parasites on all the other ones. the freeloaders. They don't. Cuckoo bees are bees that don't collect any of their own pollen. They just siphon it off from all the bees who've already done all the hard work. Which seems like, then, oh, well, cuckoo bees are evil then, I guess, right? And like, why would we want to conserve these things? But hold on a second. Not only do they look obviously super cool, right? But more importantly, cuckoo bees, you can think of them as like indicators or bioindicators. If you see these, let's say you are starting to plant a native garden, right? If you eventually see cuckoo bees, it means you've done a fantastic job, because cuckoos can only exist if there is a healthy enough host population for them to, freeload off of. So, they won't totally dominate and kill off the hosts. They just happen to exist side by side with them. But again, if you see that, it means that the host bees that you were initially trying to support are doing great, which is awesome. So you can admire how cool these guys look and know that there's no, you're not going to accidentally kill off the bees by inviting cuckoos. And lastly, because in much of our area you likely will run into honeybees. Let's talk about these for just a second. I think we check how much time we have, but I'm very nearly at the end here anyway. We're going to 2:30, right? So, yeah, okay. I'll just wrap this up really quick. To recap a few things, there's only one species of honeybee in North America, which is from Europe originally. It's been here for the last 500 years or so. There are no honeybees native to the Americas anywhere. They're the only bees in the whole United States that make honey or honeycomb. No other kinds of bees do that. Bumblebees, their close cousins, kind of come close. Bumblebees will make these pots and put nectar into them, but they don't make honey that you could harvest as a human in any kind of way. So it's honeybees, it's an exclusive thing to them. There's a lot of weird things that are exclusive to honeybees, actually. The whole, they sting once and die is a honeybee thing. Other kinds of bees don't have that, suicidal method of doing that. They also, they have hair on their eyes, which is what the top left photo is, which is this kind of bizarre, as I understand it, evolved feature. It functions as it actually helps them navigate their environment better. Honeybees forage farther than most other kinds of bees do, so it helps them pick up on wind currents and know where they're going. But the vast majority of bees do not have hairy eyes. Anyway, I gotta wrap up quick. There's a lot of weird things about honeybees, and it's ironic then that honeybees are the only kind of bee most people really know, but they are so different from the vast majority of species that exist, right? So, also they're semi-domesticated. Again, they're you can think of them like livestock, essentially. They are the insect version of chickens or cows, because the vast majority of honeybees that exist are ones that are in the care of humans. So it's a similar situation going on there to other kinds of livestock. And this is a big point, which I wish I had more time to talk about, but honeybees, if you look this up, you might find people referring to honeybees as invasive. That's not, it's complicated. That's not quite true. They can be invasive circumstantially, depending on certain things. Essentially, if there's a huge density of them in a certain area, they can be invasive in the sense that they actually end up pushing out the native bees in the area. Because think about it, if you have a hive of honeybees, which could be 50,000 bees in this one box, which is, it's kind of ridiculous that they all can fit in there, but they do. That's a ton of mouths to feed, right? So they need a ton of food, pollen and nectar. There's already kind of a dearth of native flowering plants to provide pollen and nectar in our environment. So if you have a hive, even just one hive somewhere, that has an impact. In many natural areas, one hive is not going to have a huge impact. The balance should still be kept decently well. But if you have 100 hives and the person who manages the hive has not tried to plant more plants to provide pollen and nectar, additional feed, so to speak, yeah, the honeybees can have a negative impact and push out a lot of the natives, which are already struggling. So that's an issue. Yeah, again, if you want to save the bees, don't get honeybees for that purpose. If you want to get into beekeeping as a hobby because you want honey, that's great and all. I only ask you be aware of the fact you need to be a responsible beekeeper, right? So you need to be aware of the impact honeybees can have, and you need to take steps to make sure that you are managing them responsibly to minimize those impacts. There's some like, bee people who are like kind of anti-honeybee. I'm not that way. I think that we can be pro all bees. It's just we need to be aware of, well, again, the impact that certain bees can have versus others and manage things correctly. So ideally, you only have a few hives. You make sure they're clean so that they don't spread diseases, and plant as much flowering habitat as you possibly can to provide as much food for the bees as you can, which, is just like what you would do with chickens or cows, right? Again, they're animals that need our help to survive well. So, and if you do all that, then you're going to help out the native bees anyway by providing so much extra food. So it's a win-win. So anyway, that's all I have to say about that. Okay, we're at the end here. Just wanted to point out, if I have piqued anyone's curiosity, hopefully, there's some wonderful resources if you would like to learn more about all this stuff. There's a fantastic website that was created by a friend of mine, Dr. Nick Dorian, called watchingbees.com. That is a guide on how to ID bees I love seeing people looking this up on their phones. It's great. It's awesome. Cruise through it. There's all these really cool articles with fantastic photos that show you, it's like a virtual field guide, basically, on how to ID a bunch of the bees that are all around us. There's also some really great books. If you want a coffee table book, this one called The Bees in Your Backyard is amazing. Just loaded with like mind-blowing photos of all these things. And it covers the totality of diversity in North America, which is way more than I could have presented about this. You'll find a lot of amazing stuff. And lastly, if you're a documentary watcher, PBS released this documentary several years ago called My Garden of 1,000 Bees, which I can gush about for longer. I won't because we're short on time. But basically, yeah. Absolutely mind-blowing footage. Even as a bee person, my mind was blown watching this. So I highly recommend that if you have 50 minutes to spare. Shameless self-plug, sorry. But if you're curious to also just learn more kind of about the natural world in general, I post macro photography and tidbits about awesome things I find in the environment, which I post to my Instagram and also my Facebook. So you can find me there if you're curious. And also thanks to all the great photographers in the world. And we'll end there. Do you have any questions?
Yeah, comment on the chat here about my garden of 1,000 bees is amazing.
Good. Yes, great. Well, that's what he recognizes that.
Any questions? Also, please fill out the survey if you get a chance, both online and in person, because it helps us continue doing programming like this. And students who do this are entered to win a $25 gift card. So please do that when you get a chance. The link is on the chat, or the QR code has been passed around in the room.
I know we're at 2:30. I'm happy to stick around for a little longer to answer questions if people have them, but if we have to end, I understand. So I don't know if anybody does have any questions.
I don't see any questions coming in the chat or any hands popping up.
Okay. Cool.
See one here?
Okay. Sure.
How did you get into entomology?
Oh yeah. Yeah, it's a funny story to reflect on. I got into it very randomly. Entomologists come in two flavors, I feel like. They're either like bug kids from the start, playing around in the sandlot looking for beetle grubs and stuff, or they randomly get interested in bugs later and are like, oh my god, this is awesome. I'm going to devote my whole life to this. So I was more of the latter. And basically in late high school, I was doing a little like gardening job for a relative of mine, and I was really bored and was trying to think about also what I wanted to do for my career because I had no idea. And I realized I was getting distracted by bugs in the garden. I was just like curious in my boredom, I started observing them basically. And I was like, oh, this is actually really interesting. Like I've never, paid these things any mind before, but there's a lot going on here. So I wonder if bug science is a thing. It is a thing, in fact. So I looked into it more. I ended up getting to talk with a couple entomologists that miraculously my mom had connections to that lives in my area. And anyway, they convinced me to, at least explore it as a deeper interest. So I did. And long story short, I never looked back. So, yeah.
I'm going to shut down the online version, the virtual session. But thank you for everyone who came and attended. And thank you for Francis for coming and presenting to CCBC. And thank you for all of you guys for coming as well. But I'm gonna shut this version down so the questions can continue in person, but we're losing people online
Yeah, okay.
at this point. I need some thank yous as well from there. Great
Yeah.
presentation.
Thank you all for attending. Appreciate it.
Thank you.